So, President Biden, in the meantime, is meeting with key allies today. They're focused on combating Russia's aggression in Ukraine amid fears that the conflict could spread to other parts of Eastern Europe. Earlier this morning, the U.S. announced that it would welcome up to 100,000 Ukrainian refugees. So Ed O'Keefe is on the ground there for us with a little bit more about what's happening there. The U.S. made the announcement regarding its response to Russia. What more can you tell us?
Well, good to see you guys again. The president is on to his second set of meetings for today, now meeting with members of the G7, having met earlier with NATO members. And in the midst of all these meetings, we've learned a few things. Let's start first with sanctions that are being announced this hour by the G7. They are planning to sanction now another 300 Russian officials. They are members of Russia's parliament, or the State Duma. In addition to that, they're going to target roughly 40 Russian defense companies as well. And in an effort to make sure that those already targeted by sanctions can't evade them, they're announcing new plans to make it difficult for those being targeted to not face those punishments by, among other things, making it harder for the Central Bank of Russia to prop up the ruble, and also making it harder for Russians to move money around into other maybe unsanctioned banks that they're going to try to use in a way to keep their money accessible. So another sign of the sort of non-military but economic firepower that the Western world is using against Russia in response. Beyond that, you mentioned the humanitarian aspect of this. The United States now planning to admit at least 100,000 Ukrainian refugees in response to the humanitarian crisis that's been caused by the ongoing war. Notably, the Biden administration says that these 100,000, or at least most of them, won't count against the 125,000 refugee cap that the president set for fiscal year 2022, which means you're going to see more refugees admitted into the country than was originally planned for in response to this fast unfolding crisis. In addition to admitting refugees, the administration now committing even more money to this conflict. In this case now, announcing another $1 billion in humanitarian funding to assist displaced Ukrainians and $11 billion to address global food security concerns over the next 5 years. You might wonder, why do you have to do that? Well, Ukraine is a major exporter of wheat, especially to the Middle East and North Africa, parts of the world that are now increasingly concerned that they're going to see food insecurity if this crisis persists in one of Europe's biggest agricultural exporters, Ukraine. And so because of that, the various groups that are meeting here today with President Biden understand that that's another element of how this has become such a global conflict, even though it's only occurring, at least in a military sense, in one place, and that if they don't respond now or prepare to respond to potential food shortages, this could have incredible ripple effects across much of the developing world as well.
Ed, Ukrainian President Zelensky addressed NATO leaders via video conference this morning. What did he have to say?
Well, an incredible set of remarks, Vlad, from the Ukrainian leader. Remember, he's been making speeches like this to the U.S. Congress, the Spanish Parliament, the Canadian Parliament, British lawmakers over the last several weeks. Today, one of the more exclusive political clubs in the world, the leadership of NATO. He did not ask again for NATO to run a no-fly zone over Ukraine. As his ambassador to this military alliance told us yesterday, they're not naive. They understand that that conversation is over. He did suggest that even just a few hundred tanks donated by this alliance to Ukraine could make a big difference. And he was critical of the alliance, did not ask again, as Ukraine has in the past, to become a member of the alliance, but instead offered some criticism, saying among other things, again, quote, "The worst thing during the war is not having clear answers to requests for help," speaking to a frustration they've had that the alliance is not responding to requests for help, but instead Ukraine has to go around the world and bilaterally have conversations with the United States or Canada or the United Kingdom or Germany to get things directly from those governments instead of this alliance that Europe has been told for years is designed to provide common defense. He also questioned whether the Article 5 charter of NATO, the idea that one country that's part of the group gets attacked is an attack against all of them, will sustain itself should Putin expand this military campaign into places like Poland or other parts of Eastern Europe. He said, quote, "NATO has yet to show what the alliance can do to save people, to show that this is truly the most powerful defense union in the world. And the world is waiting, and Ukraine is very much waiting for real actions, real security guarantees." We should point out that President Biden, in a written statement after the NATO meeting just a little while ago, said that Ukraine will continue to receive significant security assistance from NATO, from the United States, but a sign that, once again, President Zelensky, making use of the incredible political capital he has around the world, as there's so much intrigue in him, is bluntly criticizing and requesting help from fellow world leaders as the crisis continues and now marks 1 month since it began.
Ed O'Keefe for us in Brussels. Ed, thank you very much.